Here is a problem nobody talks about. A man can spend 20 years building systems that protect entire cities from floodwater, calculating to the cubic foot how much pressure a levee must absorb before it fails, and come home to a checking account that cannot survive a $200 emergency. The man who prevents floods is personally underwater. How does a man spend 20 years protecting cities from collapse and never once apply the same math to his own house? Think about what that means. The difference between a man whose car dies on a Tuesday and loses everything and a man whose structure holds is not income. It is not intelligence. It is not even discipline in the way most people mean that word. It is something older than any of that. Something most people read right past in a passage they think they already understand. Tonight I want to show you what an engineer found in it, and what it cost him to see it. Victor is 41 years old. A civil engineer in Cleveland who specializes in flood infrastructure, retention basins, drainage corridors, the load-bearing math that keeps neighborhoods dry when the rain comes hard. He came home on a Thursday in March with $214 in checking and a stack of 4 bills on his kitchen counter. Power, water, internet, the car note. He had been rotating them for 9 months. Pay the power bill 3 days before shutoff. Let the water slide 1 cycle. Catch it on the second notice. Internet stays alive on autopay grace. Car note, always the car note, pushed to the absolute last day before it hits the credit report. He called it a system. His wife called it Thursday. Victor was good at his job. The kind of good where his firm sent him to Baton Rouge after the 2016 floods to redesign the retention corridors on the North Drainage Basin. The kind of good where a city of 40,000 people did not flood last spring because of math he had done 2 years earlier. When he saw the $214 that Thursday, he did not sit down. He stood at the counter with his coat still on, staring at the number, and then he set the phone face down on the stack of bills, as if turning it over would change what it said. But the man who calculated retention capacity for cities had never calculated retention capacity for his own household. He did not know how much his family needed to hold to survive a single bad month. He had never asked the question. To an engineer, a levee that fails once is a failure. Victor believed that everywhere but his own life. An engineer believes that a structure either has load-bearing capacity or it does not. There is no in-between. A levee that fails 70% of the time is not a partial success. It is a defective system. You tear it out and start over. Victor believed this professionally, religiously, but he had built an exception for himself. Somewhere in his mind, he had decided that the principle stopped at the property line of someone else's project. That cities needed retention. Neighborhoods needed retention. His own life somehow did not. This was the lie Victor lived inside. It is the lie most competent people live inside. There is a phrase I want you to hold on to for the rest of this video. A reservoir doesn't hoard water. It holds it until the land needs it. That distinction between hoarding and holding is the entire difference between the man Victor was on that Thursday and the man he became 8 months later. The first time that sentence would cost him something was 2 weeks later, at a folding table in a greenhouse. 2 weeks after that Thursday, Victor's pastor called him. Not about a building project. About the community garden collective on the east side of the city, the one that fed 200 families on a sliding scale. The collective had a problem. Every good harvest, they accumulated a surplus. Every surplus, somehow, was gone by the next planting season. They had tried to build a reserve fund 3 different times. Each time it collapsed. The pastor said, "I need someone who understands systems to look at it. Not a finance person. A systems person." Victor almost said no. He told the pastor he was not a money person. He suggested 2 other names. The pastor said the other names were not available, and that without help, the collective would not survive the winter. 200 families would lose their access by December. Victor said yes. He did not say yes because he was generous. He said yes because saying no would have required him to admit something he was not ready to admit out loud. That he had no standing to refuse a problem he was already drowning in. The next Saturday morning, the collective's coordinator handed him a handwritten ledger. 11 months of harvest income and expenditure. Victor sat at a folding table in the corner of a greenhouse and ran his finger down the columns. The pattern was identical every month. Surplus arrives. Surplus is spent within 14 days. Account returns to 0. New shortage emerges. Emergency request goes out to the church. 11 consecutive months. The same shape. Victor closed the ledger and did not say anything for a long time. It was like looking at an X-ray of his own chest. He had spent years drawing retention basins on blueprints, structures designed to hold what the land could not absorb in the moment. Now he was staring at one made of numbers and months. And the basin was empty every time. Because he had seen that shape before. It was the shape of his own checking account for the last 9 years. In that greenhouse silence, something else broke first. Here is the part nobody warns you about. The most dangerous moment in a man's life is not when he discovers he has a problem. It is when he discovers, by accident, while trying to help someone else, that he is the exact problem he was asked to diagnose. You cannot unsee that. You can try. Most people do. They walk away, they tell themselves it was just a coincidence, they refuse the assignment, they go back to rotating their bills on Thursdays. But the ones who do not walk away, the ones who sit with what they just saw, those are the ones whose lives change. Because that dangerous moment is not a trap. It is an invitation. It is the moment a man stops being the emergency and starts becoming the reservoir. What happened to Victor next is the part I want you to study carefully. Because the principle he found is older than every economy on earth. And it is the difference between holding wealth and being held hostage by the lack of it. That night, long after the greenhouse had gone dark, Victor could not sleep. He kept thinking about the ledger. About the shape. He went into his home office at 1 a.m. and pulled up his laptop and started searching for historical food reserve systems. Not because he was trying to fix his own life. Because his engineering mind was looking for the structural failure point in the collective's model, and he could not turn it off. He still thought he was researching for them, not for himself. He searched for early agricultural reserve practices. The Roman granary system. The medieval tithe barns. Each one built on the same structural logic: hold a portion of the surplus before the surplus is distributed, so the system has load-bearing capacity when the pressure comes. Not after. Before. He didn't know yet what this would demand of his own Thursdays. And then, because someone on a forum mentioned it, he opened Genesis 41. He read it as an engineer first. Joseph is brought before Pharaoh. He interprets the dream: 7 years of abundance followed by 7 years of famine. Then he proposes a system. Take 20% of the harvest during the years of plenty. Store it in centralized cities. When the famine comes, the reserve absorbs the shock. Victor read it twice. The math was clean. The structural logic was beautiful. A load-bearing system designed before the stress arrives. Then he read it a third time. Something stopped him cold. Joseph did not build the reserve when the famine started. He built it while the abundance was still flowing. He took 20% off the top during the good years, when nobody felt the pressure, when there was no emergency, when every grain bin in Egypt was overflowing and the temptation to consume was at its absolute maximum. That is when he held it back. Victor put the phone down and looked at the wall of his office for a long time. He had never once in his life saved before the pressure came. He had only ever reacted. Every dollar that had ever entered his account had a job waiting for it before it arrived. There had never been a moment in 9 years where money sat in his life without already being promised to someone else. He had been running a system with zero reserve, zero load-bearing margin, zero capacity to absorb a single shock. And he had been calling it normal. 2 days later, Victor finished his initial report for the collective. He drove out to the garden at the end of the workday to drop it off. The coordinator was not there. The parking lot was empty. He sat in his truck with the engine off. The collective's raised beds were visible through the windshield, dark in the dusk. His phone screen was the only light in the cab. Genesis 41 was still open from the night before. He sat there for 40 minutes. Not crying. Not praying, exactly. Just sitting with a fact he could no longer push away. For 20 years he had built walls for strangers and left his own house without one. He had spent 20 years of his career calculating the exact volume a retention basin must hold to absorb a 100-year flood. He had built his entire professional identity on the principle that a system either has load-bearing capacity or it does not. And he had never once calculated what his household needed to hold to survive a single bad month. He did not quit on the assignment. He could not. The engineering logic would not let him. The same mind that would not let him sign off on a defective levy would not let him walk away from a defective structure he could now see clearly in his own life. The principle did not stop at the property line. It had never stopped at the property line. He had just refused to look. He did not know if he was going to present the report or tear it up. The following Tuesday, Victor presented the redesigned reserve structure to the collective's board. 20% of every harvest, transferred immediately into a locked account before any distribution decisions were made. Not a percentage of what was left over. A percentage taken first, off the top, the way Joseph had described it. Untouchable except by a two-signature withdrawal during a declared shortage. Victor did not design the financial mechanism. He named the structural failure surplus consumed before reserve is established, the same pattern he had been living, and laid it on the table. The board's coordinator, a woman who had been running the collective's books for 6 years, was the one who translated it into the specific account structure and withdrawal rules. Victor had read the X-ray. She knew where to set the bone. The board approved it that night. Victor drove home. His wife was already asleep. He poured a glass of water and stood at the kitchen counter for a few minutes. Then he sat down on the couch and opened his bank app. At 11:23 p.m. on a Tuesday, he opened a new savings account. He named it Reserve. He transferred $340, 20% of the paycheck that had cleared that morning. He did not tell anyone. He did not announce it. He did not write a journal entry about it. He just did it. For years he had been a hired hand in his own household, building load-bearing structures for strangers, leaving his own foundation bare. Sitting in that truck, he had realized it. Now, at 11:23 p.m., he was doing something about it. He did the same thing on the next paycheck. And the next. And the one after that. The first month was difficult. The second month was uncomfortable. On the third paycheck, he almost moved the transfer. A bill had come in 4 days early, the water bill, of all things, and for 20 minutes he sat with his phone in his hand, the reserve account open, doing the math on whether he could pull $50 back and still call it a system. He did not pull it back. He set the phone down and paid the water bill 3 days late, the way he always had. But the reserve stayed whole. And then, somewhere between month 3 and month 4, something he had not expected began to happen. He stopped rotating bills. There was nothing to rotate. The structure was holding. Every bill arrived, every bill was paid on its actual due date, and there was money in the reserve account that did not have a job waiting for it. He didn't just feel less afraid. He felt responsible in a way he never had. Not responsible like a man managing a crisis. Responsible like a man who had been trusted with something and was finally acting like it. He had never experienced that in 9 years. 6 months in, the collective ran into a partial harvest failure. Late frost, then drought in July. The yield came in at 63% of projection. A failure like that would have collapsed the old fund within 3 weeks. The reserve absorbed it without breaking. The collective ran its second season without an emergency request. 200 families ate through the short harvest. The fund did exactly what Joseph had designed it to do 4,000 years ago. Victor was standing at his kitchen counter on a Wednesday evening when his phone buzzed. A text from the board coordinator. The fund held. We fed everyone through the short harvest. First time ever. He read it twice. He set the phone down. The structure had worked. Not because of Victor. Because Joseph had designed it 4,000 years ago and Victor had finally stopped arguing with the blueprint. The coordinator's text was not the proof. The truck cab had been the proof. This was just the structure doing what structures do when they are built correctly. 2 weeks later, his transmission started slipping. The repair came in at $1,180. He paid it from the reserve, which by then had grown to $2,100. He did not rotate a single bill. He did not delay the water payment. He did not call the credit card company to ask for an extension. For the first time in 9 years, an unexpected expense did not become a cascade. If his household could hold, maybe there were other floods he was meant to stand in front of. The structure held. And Victor understood something he had not understood before. Joseph was not a financial genius. Joseph was a man who believed the abundance was not his to consume. That is the entire principle. The grain Joseph stored was never Joseph's. The reserve Victor was building was never Victor's. It was being held in trust for the next bad month, the next partial harvest, the next thing that had not happened yet but would. A reservoir doesn't hoard water. It holds it until the land needs it. I need to tell you something before we go further. In 2016, I sat alone in a hotel room in Columbus, Ohio. I was there for a conference where I was supposed to speak about financial clarity, and I had a yellow legal pad on the desk where I had written out every number I owed. $34 in checking. $11,400 in credit card debt. A car note 3 payments behind. I had been talking about money stewardship for 2 years, and I could not cover a $200 emergency without my hands going cold. That November, I missed my daughter's recital because I could not afford the gas to drive 4 hours, and I was too ashamed to tell her mother the truth. I am not telling you this because it makes a good story. I am telling you because the principal Victor found in that parking lot, I found it on that legal pad. And it did not feel like wisdom. It felt like the floor giving out. That is exactly where it has to start. My name is Elias. I walked away from 15 years on Wall Street to find out what the ancient texts actually say about this. I watched bonuses hit accounts I couldn't keep positive for 7 days. I knew the language of wealth and I had none of its structure. What I found when I finally stopped performing and started reading is on this channel. The night I found it, I did what Victor did. Not a grand gesture. A small account. A first transfer. $11, because that was what I had. I named it reserve and I did not touch it for 30 days. That was the line. Now look at your own life for a moment. You are not Victor. The details are different. Maybe you are not an engineer. Maybe the number in your checking account is higher or lower than $214. Maybe the bills you rotate are different bills. But the shape is the same. Every dollar that arrives in your account has a job waiting for it before it arrives. There has never been a moment, not in years, when money sat in your life without already being spent. You have been running a system with zero reserve, zero load-bearing margin, zero capacity to absorb a single shock. You are not the emergency. You are the reservoir. And the worst part is that you have been calling it normal. Here is your assignment for this week. 3 steps. That is all. Step 1. Tonight, before you sleep, open your banking app and create a new account. Name it reserve. Do not fund it yet. Just create it. Step 2. On your next paycheck, whatever the amount, transfer 10% into that account before you do anything else. Not what is left over. What comes out first. Joseph did not take 20% of what remained after Egypt ate. He took it before Egypt ate. Step 3. Do not tell anyone. Do not announce it. Do not post about it. The shift is not in what you say. It is in what you do at 11:23 p.m. on a Tuesday when nobody is watching. When the tire blows on the highway or the fridge dies on a Thursday, that is when you will know whether you built the structure or only thought about it. If you decided tonight that you are done running a life with zero load-bearing capacity, that you are no longer a hired hand in your own household, type "I am the steward" in the comments below. That is not a slogan. That is a covenant with yourself. A line you cross in public so you cannot quietly walk back across it in private. Share this video with one person who is drowning in the same shape Victor was drowning in. Not because I asked. Because they deserve to see what you just saw. If this channel is making you think about money the way you should have been taught to think about it 20 years ago, hit subscribe. Not for entertainment. To keep building the foundation. Father, we come to you tonight as people who have been consuming everything you have given us the moment it arrives. We confess that we have called this normal. We have called it survival. We have called it everything except what it actually is, a refusal to hold what was never ours to consume. Teach us the discipline of the reservoir. Not to hoard. Not to fear, but to hold what you have placed in our hands until the land needs it. Give us the courage to take the first portion off the top of an abundance that does not yet feel like abundance, and trust that the structure will hold when the famine arrives. We are not engineers. We are stewards. In the name of Jesus. Amen.